Salvete omnes. This is Gaius Caesaris Commentarii de Bello Gallico Liber Primus, chapter 23. And Caesar writes, Post redie eos diei, quod omnino bidum supererat, cum exercitui frumentum metiria porteret, et quod abibracte, oppido aeduorum longe maximo et copiosissimo, non amplius millibus passuum duo de vigenti aberat, rei frumentariae prospiciendum existimavit. Semicolon. We're still not done. It keeps going. Post redie. Starting with post redie. You hopefully see post, and there's also da. It means on the next day. Taken together, this whole thing means on the next day. It's like on the following day of this day, on the day which follows this day, eos da, meaning the day that we were currently on from the previous chapter. Eos da, when the ambush went wrong, when Considius done goofed. Eos da is the genitive of is a id, and dies a masculine. Eos da, taken together on the following day. Quod plus the indicative, because this thing, because omnino being the adverb form of omnis, so altogether, wholly, entirely. Bidum, from bidum e neuter, hopefully you can see by, and then dies, so 2 days, a 2-day period, and then supererat. It's super sum. So the erat, the sum part, that actually conjugates. The super part does not. So it's erat, the third person singular imperfect active indicative. It's just got super in front of it. And it means to be super above, or to be left over, to survive. The bidum is the subject of supererat, so the 2-day period was left over. Because altogether, 2 days were left. Cum, this is cum conjunction, when, since, although, not cum preposition with, because the next verb is subjunctive, apporteret. When, since, although, and it's going to be when. So it's this 2-day period when exercitui is the dative singular masculine of exercitus us masculine, the army. It's going to be the dative indirect object. Receiving the frumentum grain, frumentum e neuter grain, either the nominative or the accusative. And it's going to be the accusative. Metiri, from metior, metiri, metitus, to met out, deponent verb, to met out, when it was necessary to met out the frumentum, the grain, for the army. This is a present infinitive because its deponent translated as active, to met out, to measure out, meaning that he's going to have to divvy up the rations. He takes all the grain and they divvy them up. They measure out the grain and give the rations for the men so they can eat, because an army marches on its stomach. Caesar's about out of food for his men. He has to stop the march and go somewhere where they can re-up their supplies. And apporteret, this is the third person singular, imperfect active subjunctive of apportet, apportere, apportuit, which takes a subject accusative and an objective infinitive. The subject of apportet, if you can tell by the principal parts, third person singular t, apportet, and the third principal part, the perfect apportuit, the subject is always an it, a third person singular neuter impersonal it. So it was necessary for an accusative to do something. Here it is necessary to met out the grain for the army. Et, and, quod, because, just like this is quod because plus the indicative, this is quod because, also is going to take the indicative, it's just way down here. Because ablative of separation from Bibracte. Bibracte has a slightly irregular declension. It is a proper noun. It is the holy city of the Druids, and I believe the capital city of the Aedui, Bibracte. This is the ablative. Because from, ablative separation, from Bibracte, comma, in oppido, this is ablative because it's an appositive to Bibracte, standing in apposition to Bibracte, giving us more information about what Bibracte is. Your average Roman might not know what Bibracte is. It's an oppido, it's a town. Aeduorum, of the genitive plural aedui. It is longe, the adverb form of longosaon, by far. And it's modifying the adjective maximo, because adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, other adverbs. By far, maximo. Maximus aon being the superlative of magnus. This is not just a oppidum magnum. It is an oppidum maximum. Superlative, very great, very large. We could say by far the largest town of the Aedui. Et, and also copiosissimo. Here's a superlative of copiosus aon. Abundant or wealthy, very wealthy. It is by far the largest and the wealthiest superlative of the Aedui. And oppido stands in apposition because from Bibracte, a town of the Aedui by far the largest and the wealthiest, most plentiful. Known, adverb not, amplius, the comparative adverb of amplusaon, not, this is going to be farther, than, ablative of comparison because we have a comparative, millibus, this is the ablative of millia, millium, neuter, plural. So ablative of comparison, thousands, possuum, of paces, genitive, plural, partive genitive, of paces. And how many thousands of paces are there? There are duo de viginti, 2 from 20. There are 18. 18 thousands of paces. You can take this all together as 18 miles. Aberat, third person singular, he, Caesar. He was aberat, known. He was not away, from Bibracte. The ab in aberat shows up also in the preposition a Bibracte. And because he was not farther than 18 miles from Bibracte, comma, a town of the Aedui by far the largest and most plentiful. So for these reasons, because altogether 2 days remained when it was necessary to measure out the grain for the army, measure out their rations, and because he was not farther than 18 miles from Bibracte, a town of the Aedui by far the largest and most plentiful, and because of those 2 reasons, rei frumentariae prospiciendum existimavit. Here's the main clause. The main verb is existimavit. Rei frumentariae, this is either the genitive or the dative of res, there's the noun, frumentaria, where this is an adjective, frumentarius aon. So altogether it means like grain stuff, grain supply. Taken together it means grain supply. It's either the dative or the genitive. It's going to be the dative because it works with this compound verb prospiciendum. So prospicio, you look out for something. You see prospicio, spicio, you look out, you see for something. You look out for something. Because we're looking out for something in the dative, and this is a gnarly ND thingy, this is a passive periphrastic. There's an implied form of essay here because we are inside indirect statement. What? Indirect statement? When did that happen? What's going on? Existimavit. Yes, the verb that introduces indirect statement can, of course, come after the indirect statement. Re frumentarii prospiciendum is indirect statement, introduced by existimavit. He thought, he estimated, he reckoned. Caesar reckoned that prospiciendum. Notice the subject is it's an it. It must be seen for the grain supply, meaning the grain supply must be looked out for, must be seen to. It must be seen to the grain supply, because prospicio takes a dative. If I look out for something, the thing I look out for, prospicio, the thing I look out for will take the dative. If something is looked out for, that thing that is looked out for is still going to be in the dative, because intransitive verbs in Latin, even when they turn into passive, still take the same case they normally would take if they're active. It's just that the subject has become an impersonal it. It must be looked out for the grain supply, because passive paraphrastics must always be passive. The grain supply must be looked out for, would be a more natural English translation. So on the following day, he thought, he reckoned, he estimated, he made a really good guess. He guesstimated that the grain supply must be looked out for, must be seen to, because altogether 2 days were left when it was necessary to measure out the grain for the army, and because he was not farther than 18 miles from Bibracte, a town of the Aedui by far the largest and most plentiful. We got to stock up, got to re-up. 2 days are left before we're out. We're 18 miles away. We can cover 20 miles at a slow, normal pace, so might as well turn aside. The Helvetians will have to wait. We have to have food. If we don't have our supply lines, if we don't have our food, if we don't have grain, if we don't have fresh water, we don't see to any disease within the ranks, then the army doesn't last very long. Itaque, and so, therefore, it's ita and que, and ita thus, and so, in iter, a march, iter teneris neuter. Ab Helvetis, ab, from, away from, plus the ablative separation from the Helvetians, avertit, he turned aside his march from the Helvetians. Because of this, and so, he turned his march aside from the Helvetians, and also, and then, ac is et, going to the gym, souped up et. If the next word began with a vowel, ac would become atque. And Bibracte ire contenit, and he hastened to go to Bibracte. Bibracte, names of cities, towns, small islands. Town, name of a town, it's an oppidum. Therefore, notice the lack of preposition odd. We just put Bibracte in the accusative. Yes, that's the accusative of Bibracte, to indicate motion towards, because names of cities, towns, small islands do not take prepositions to indicate motion towards, or separation, or location. Okay, awesome. Well done. Ea res per fugitivos Luci Aemili decurrionis equitum gallorum hostibus nuntiatur. So ea res, this matter. Which one? The one we just talked about. This thing, this stuff, this information. This, we could even say, yeah, this information. Probably the best one here. This information per fugitivos, through, takes the accusative, fugitivos, fugitives, people who have fugio fugere, run away, through deserters. Luci Aemili, Lucius Aemilius would be the nominative. He is a decurrionis, and a positive. He's genitive. Luci Aemili decurrionis is also genitive. And then equitum is going to be genitive plural of eques, equitus, masculine, the knights. Now a decurrio That is a person who is in charge of a squadron of cavalry. So you can see deck in there. So that's going to be decurio, as in decem 10. It's a cavalry officer in charge of a decuria. 10 knights, hence the equitum there. So this information, through deserters of Lucius Aemilius. In a positive, a decurion, like a centurion, is an officer who is in charge of centum, 100 dudes. A decurion is in charge of 10 knights. He's a decurion of the cavalry gallorum of the Gallic Knights. Ever since the Social War, that 91 to 88 BC conflict between the Rome and the Suebi, the Italian allies, ever since then, the Roman army stopped enrolling citizens into the cavalry corps, and instead they would rely upon Gauls. Now these are Gallic knights that have abandoned their stations under our friend Lucius Aemilius here, because they're deserters, and they hostibus nuntiator. They've gone to the enemy. So ea res, this matter, nuntiator, is reported, meaning the information that Caesar, because they're running out of food and they're only 18 miles from Bibracte, and that they're going to go to Bibracte in order to re-up. This information is reported to the enemy, meaning to the Helvetians, hostibus, dative, indirect object, through deserters of Lucius Aemilius, a decurion of the Gallic cavalry. So the Gauls have decided to go tattle on Caesar, tell the Helvetians what the Romans' plans are. By the way, the punishment for desertion was crucifixion. It is the only time you're allowed to crucify a Roman citizen, because Roman citizens who have joined the army technically have given up their citizenship, kind of. They've given their citizenship to the gods, basically. It's an oath. Their military vow is called a sacramentum, which means it's sacer. It goes to the gods. It's part of it. Their life belongs to the divine. Therefore, the state kind of takes your life under its control. While it may belong to the gods, the state is keeping your existence for the gods. So the state can punish you in any way it sees fit. And desertion is the only time that you can be crucified if you're a Roman citizen, because technically they believed your citizenship had been forfeit. So these guys have run away. Technically they're Gauls. Helvetii. So we have the Helvetians. So this is what the Romans are going to do. And then these Gallic knights have run away, and they've told the Helvetians. Well, what are the Helvetians going to do in response? The Helvetii, nominative plural masculine. Well, that's easy. So, quod timore per territos Romanos discedere a se existimarent, eo magis, quod pridie superioribus locis occupatis, proelium non commississent, sive eo quod re frumentaria intercludi posse confiderent, commutato consilio atque itinere converso, nostros a novissimo agmine insequi ac lacessare coiperunt. And this sentence finishes off the rest of the chapter. So those Helvetians, so this so stands in for si and then way. So si as in if, and then way, a ve, or if. And it coordinates, it's correlative with this si way. So and si way are pretty equivalent. It's like neck and neckway. So we have so, si way. Whether, as in whether, whether this or this. Whether or. Whether or. Whether, quod, and then this quod is going to go with existimarent. This quod is going to go with commissisent. And this quote is going to go with confiderent. Now notice that the subjects of all of these verbs, third person plural, will be the Helvetians. What we're doing here, quod plus the subjunctive, we're not inside indirect statement. What's happening here is quod plus the subjunctive gives the reason based on what the author thinks is fact. If it were quod plus the indicative, like it is up here, because altogether 2 days were left, Caesar, the author, knows that it is a fact because there are 2 days left. He knows that's a fact. But if Caesar's giving the reason here, it's not a reason that he knows for a fact. Otherwise, he would put it in the indicative. He's putting this in the subjunctive. This has the technical name of quod plus the subjunctive. He's guessing the reason why. He's offering supposition. He doesn't know for real, for fact. Whether because, you can even add, I suppose, on the grounds that they existimarent, they believed, they thought, the Helvetians reckoned, that the Romans, perterritos, terrified because of fear, just like Considius, who was timore perterritum, just say panicked. Because the Romans, because having panicked, they discedere a se, they were leaving, they were taking their leave, discedo a se. Remember, this is an intransitive verb, and it takes a preposition a ab or de or ax to show separation, to leave from a place. Here it's leaving from them. Circle se, the reflexive, and draw an arrow to the Helvetians. So the Helvetians, whether, I don't know, they thought, because they thought, it's the subjunctive because he doesn't know the real reason. He's guessing. Whether because they thought that the Romans panicked and were leaving from them, eo magis quod pridie superioribus. So eo magis, more so because, or even more so because on the previous day, pridie, which is very similar to up here, on the previous day, or this is post-ridie, this is pridie, the previous day instead of the next day, because on the previous day, superioribus locis occupatis, ablative plural, ablative plural, ablative plural, ablative absolute, with the noun and its adjective, participle, translate the noun and its adjective and the participle, with the higher ground, the higher locations, the higher places, having been taken. Because that's what T-Lab was doing on the previous day. He took the high ground. Or more so because on the previous day, with the high ground taken, after taking the high ground, proelium non commissisent, they had not joined battle. Or more so because on the previous day, you could say something like, even when the high ground was taken, they had not joined battle. Sive, or because re frumentaria intercludi posse confiderent, or because the re frumentaria, ablative, because of the grain supply, intercludi, here this is going to be ablative separation with intercludi, because you intercludi, you close someone off from in ablative. There's a separation involved. Or because posse confiderent, they were confident. Third person plural, imperfect, active, subjunctive of confido. They were confident that they were able, that it was possible for him to be closed off, intercludi, from the grain supply. Because of that, and the Helvetians, whether because they thought that the Romans panicked and were leaving from them, more so because on the previous day, even though the higher ground had been taken, they had not joined battle, or because they were confident that it was possible that they be closed off from the grain supply. Commutato concilio, from commuto, commutare, commutavi, commutatus, to change thoroughly. And it works with concilio, concilium e neuter. So ablative, absolute. With their concilium e neuter, their plan, commutato, having been changed, after changing their plan, they changed their plan, and also itinere converso, with their iter itineris neuter, their route converso, turned aside. Their course changed. So they changed their plan and they changed their course. Notice the nice chiasmus we have here. We have commutato, participle, noun, and noun, participle. So when this is arranged like commutato, participle, and noun, and then if we put noun underneath it and then participle, it makes an X. That formation is chiasmus. Commutato, concilio, atque, itinere, converso, both are ablative absolutes. So with their plan changed, after altering their plan and changing their course, changing their march, changing their route, nostros, there's an implied viros, accusative plural masculine direct object of the verb insequi. A novissimo agmine. When Latin talks about troops, soldiers, infantry, cavalry on a wing of the army, on either the cornu dextrum, the right wing, or the cornu sinistrum, the left wing. When we talk about troops located on those wings or in those places in the army, on the field, we don't use in plus the ablative to show location. We use ab plus the ablative of separation. So these are our men. We could say from, this is the rear, as in the rear guard. The novissimum agmen is the rear guard. It's the back of the army, as opposed to the front of the army, which is the vanguard, the van. So our dudes in the rear guard. You can even literally say from the rear guard if you would like. Insequi, insequor, insequi, insecutus, to follow up against. And it's the direct object is nostros. Ac, and also to lacessere. So insequi is an infinitive, ac, lacessere, another infinitive, and then coeperunt. Coeperunt is the third person plural, perfect active indicative. This verb, coipi, coipisse, coiptus, is defective and only shows up in the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. It does not have a present, it does not have an imperfect, and it does not have a future. When it's perfect tense, like it is here, we translate it as the present tense. When it's pluperfect, we translate it as the past tense, usually perfect. And when it's future perfect, we translate it as the future. So they begin. Coepero looks perfect, translate as present. They begin. To do what? To follow our men in the rear, meaning our men who are in the rear guard, in the back part of the army on the march, and to lacessere, to harass them, to it's a little bit more than annoy, provoke them, to harass or provoke. So altogether, this monster of a sentence says something like, the Helvetians, or we could even save the Helvetians for later. Whether because the Helvetians thought that the Romans panicked and were leaving from them, or more so because on the previous day, they had not joined battle even when the higher ground had been taken, or because they were confident that it was possible for them to be closed off from their grain supply, they changed their plan, turned aside their route, and begin to follow and provoke or harass our men in the rear guard. So the Romans have decided to turn aside to go to Bibracte. They're not going to follow the Helvetians anymore because they're out of food, so they go to Bibracte, large town, holy city of the Druids, in order to re-up their food. The Helvetians, they see this movement. They're told that this is what's going to happen by Gallic deserters from the Roman army, from the Roman knights. And they say the Romans are going to Bibracte. Oh, interesting, said the Helvetians. Maybe the Romans are panicking, they say, and that's why they're taking their leave of us. Or, and this could be more so, because on the previous day, even though they had the higher ground, they did not fight. Interesting. They didn't join battle. Maybe the Romans are cowards, the Helvetians are thinking. Or maybe it's possible, we're confident, that we might be able to close the Romans off from their grain supply, from their supply lines. And because of that, Caesar's not exactly sure. What we know is that the Helvetians changed their plans. They turned aside their normal routes, their normal course, and they begin to follow the Romans who were en route to Bibracte. So they begin to follow up behind the Romans, and of course they're going to encounter the Romans' rear guard first, and they begin to harass, provoke, annoy, bother the Romans in the rear guard. It's probably a little bit of skirmishing and fighting.